Hello, welcome to Gerry and Al. I am Albert Mora here with Gerry Magallan, who is the real-life lead role in our story, and this is a massive story. This is the first of what we expect to be a series of conversations between we two friends. And we must start with a warning, because this is a tragic story. In our conversations, we won't be graphic, but to get right to the point, Gerry was exploited from birth until the age of 10. And those people who are interested in more detail can read Gerry's extensive writings, which are available online, and we will supply you with means of reading that. I want to start by saying my state of mind as I start is that I celebrate, first of all, this sacred life. I celebrate my love and friendship with Gerry and with you as our listeners and all of your loved ones. That's what drives me just generally in all my projects. And that's what I want to bring to this story, because when it's this tragic, I'm hoping that that foundation of mine helps all of us to live this actually in a more impactful way. Because if we can get past the pain and go to the love that we can glean from these experiences in our life, it can bear great fruit. So that's why I'm doing this. Gerry was a founding member of the band Free Verse in Northwest Indiana, and it was founded something like in 72, 73. I get to brag for Gerry. He wouldn't do this, that in 1974 or 5, they won the Battle of the Bands against something like 600 bands on radio, well, run by a radio station in Chicago, and they won like studio recording time, and these guys were like 16 years old, and they were a remarkable band. They broke up in the middle 70s, but then Gerry and two other guys, Chris Guerra and Dan Rodriguez, our lovely friends, Chris is in peace. They reformed the band in like 79-ish, and they auditioned me and let me in the band, and I was terrified. It was Gerry who called me, this very person who called me to let me know I was in the band, and who we became great friends with. Thanks to them, I've had a life filled with music. To this day, I perform music. I have gigs coming this very weekend. So this is the impact Gerry has had on my life, and much more. So, Gerry, do you remember what year you left? I thought it was like around 1983.
I left, I believe it was the same year I married my first wife. I want to say 1982.
So then, since you left the band, we've stayed in occasional touch through the years. We've always known where we live. We've always been in contact. Was it around 2020, Gerry, when you started showing me your writings on this topic?
Yeah, the writing started in late 2019, and I started looking out for, people to read and get opinions and that kind of thing. Yeah, 2020.
Since Gerry brought me in to reading this story, we have become very close. Gerry is as close to me as anybody in my whole life. My ultimate goal is to protect children. Another real important goal is so people will get to know Gerry by talking to me. You've heard the human being's voice behind it, and I think that it will immensely help you to gauge where he is now, and who it is that's writing this stuff. Kind of what are his agendas? What are his motives? He's gone through some actual, literal hell. And he's gone through pain and anger. Yet he's in a place today where I think he's really been able to line up his motives in a beautiful way. If I do a good job, people will know who did what. And I'm going to name some quick role players. We're going to go back to the people who started this spiritual path that Gerry's grandma was on that made his life become what it became. So you're going to learn a little bit about the Mexica and the Nahua and then the Spaniards who came to Mexico and the Catholic Church and how the indigenous religion blended with the Catholic Church. And it goes right to Gerry's grandma, to other people in his family, and then to very important names. I'm going to name just one, somebody named Louis. And that's it. There'll be mob figures. There'll be a bishop. There'll be many other relevant names. But Louis and Gerry's grandma and Gerry, I think, are the real important three names. Of course, Gerry will perfect that understanding that I have. Another important thing for me in my goals is for it to be a clear story, because it is a complicated story. It involves so many angles and so many interconnections that are astounding. If I've done a good job, people will understand the story when we're done with these conversations. And I want to do it in order. That could be the toughest challenge, because sometimes it's just not easy to keep a story that's complex in chronological order. You got to go back and forth in time sometimes. And then location. I want people to know where this stuff happened because it plays so strongly in the story. Here we go. So Gerry, you are a brave person to have gone public the way you have. Of all the things that have stunned me, number one, what happened to you stunned me. But number two is your incredible courage in going public. So for today's introduction, what do you have? Can you give us a short list of 5 kind of number one reasons you're going to let me talk to you the way we're doing today?
Thanks, Al. Thanks. I appreciate your thoughts here and your words. I heard nothing that I disagreed with at all. This is good. This is good for me, first and foremost, and good, I think, for other people that might be interested in a story that is bigger than most people would want to admit, because it involves people, places, and times that we think we have all, that we understand, that we know the history and that we move on from. But in fact, my story shows me, and I think it'll show other people, that we're still entangled in the messes we've made for hundreds of years, and we're trying to get out. And so I'll draw parallels here, maybe as a tease, I don't know, but there are parallels here. As a child, I was involved with people who were criminals, mafia people, prostitutes, that kind of thing. And then with the Catholic Church, big time, in that they wanted to conduct experiments. My family happened to be in their sites, in the Catholic Church's sites, because of my ancestors who were people who didn't agree with the Catholic Church down in Mexico and what they were doing with the colonization and all that stuff. So there's that one point. There's another point in that there are parallels here in terms of protecting children. And this goes mainly to the mafia, but also to the church elites, mainly here in the country, but around the world. At that time, this is the 1950s that I'm talking about, the 1950s. Today we hear about Epstein Island and the things that the elites and the rich are able to get away with. Well, that all started a long time ago, and I probably saw some of that. The people that held me captive, so to speak, were worshiping Baal, which is Baal, the same demon or Satan or whatever that the Epstein Island Satanists were worshiping. There's people that are common in both stories, and I'll name one, Roy Cohn. So this is something that's been going on for a long, long time. So there are parallels there. And there's also one particular, bullet point, which is the one that escapes most people. And that's that the Catholic Church came up against a philosophy or religion or something that they have been trying to destroy for a long time, up until recently. And that's the Mesoamerican belief system that they encountered when they got here in 1519. And that belief system has thrown them for a loop for the longest time. And for a long time, they tried to destroy it. My ancestors happened to be from the shaman, I don't know how to pronounce it, kind of people that were the priest and clergy of the Mesoamericans. And so they held in the family line those jobs, those things that they did for their people. Sometime in the 17 or 1800s, the Vatican decided that they were going to hold talks with these shaman, and one of them happened to be my great-great-grandmother. And in those talks, they agreed that they were going to hold some kind of experiments, betting. My great-grandmother was very into gambling. And so they set it up as a bet.
Well, let me ask you to emphasize that. It's an experiment, isn't it, this whole story?
Yes. It's really an experiment, and this is where I will probably lose a lot of people because they'll think I'm trying to compare myself to Galileo, and I'm not. But if you know the true story of Galileo, no, it wasn't the Catholic Church was against him and was going to torture him if he didn't agree with him. It was a divided Catholic Church, as it's always been. Half of them were the authoritarians. There's those Catholics. And then there's the Catholics who are searching for God, who are seeking knowledge. Those are the Catholics that brought Galileo forward. And those are the Catholics that knew there was something to learn here. those are the same Catholics who agreed with my great-great-grandmother to this bet, that there was something here that they knew they didn't understand, and they wanted to understand. And it's the old FAFO. They fucked around and found out. So this is where we're at. And so because this entire bet is based on the power of suggestion, something that we've been taught over the last generation or two is just nonsense. We don't even entertain it anymore, but we live by it. We live by the power of suggestion. So my ancestors set out to prove that that is, in fact, religion, the power of suggestion.
That's amazing and profound, and that's where we're going to end up many times. So I take that to mean that this is what one of your goals is, to convey this, to open people's eyes to the bigger picture, not only your personal experience, but the fact this is set in an amazing, long, historical timeline. That's part of what's been blowing my mind every inch of the way, is how it connects all the way up to modern day, however, to the church today, just as strongly as it connected in those beginnings you just described.
Well, the only thing I want to add to that, which is something that I think is kind of paints the big picture here, is that if you're going to test the power of suggestion, you don't test it on one person. You test it on an entire community. And what the experiment or the bet is not over. It's not over until my 71st birthday, which is coming up this summer. But the bet basically says that everyone around me will have that challenge of whether to believe or not without receipts, which means without evidence, entirely on their ability to think for themselves and to connect dots on their own. And that is where the hard part of this is that unfortunately the experiment, the bet has yielded that most people are too afraid to think for themselves and would rather persecute someone who is thinking for themselves, who has freed themselves from the overall power of suggestion that the society puts forward. So that's the rub. But I just want to add that. So if you have okay. So about my personal life, go ahead.
Yeah, let's get into this practical stuff, nuts and bolts. Where and when were you born, Gerry? Tell us about your natural parents and your full and half siblings.
What I do know is that I was born in Elwood, Indiana, in 1955, somewhere around the summer. I would say June to July, somewhere in there, of 1955. I'll know when this is over, exactly when I was born. And at the time, I didn't know that I had a full sibling who was a brother who was a year later introduced to me as a cousin, and I grew up thinking he was my cousin. And then I also have 3 half-sisters who were much older than me, and I probably passed away by now, maybe not all of them. And my mother, who was dying of cancer when I was born, but she was assassinated for a reason. We'll explain that at some point. And my father, who was a willing subject in the experiments, who wanted me to know him as my grandfather.
And to be clear, you did know him as your grandfather until what age? When did you learn he was your natural father?
5 years ago, as I started remembering. It came from the memories from his mouth. I'm your father, just like Darth Vader or whatever. I don't know. That's my real family. The mob and the people that were in charge of the experiments wanted me to be raised by my mother's half-sister, who was a working prostitute at the time, and she was picked, so to speak, for this for a lot of reasons, and it's too long to get into this now, but it has to do with rituals and things that my grandmother was involved with, these shaman things. So the family that raised me, it was assembled for this experiment. That's the best way to put it. They were assembled. It was supposed to be a large family. The experiment stems from earlier experiments that were failing, that were started by earlier popes that had to do with incest. And when the opportunity came up to do a lifelong experiment, they jumped at that and they let go of the older experiments. So the family that raised me was put together. And they were put together in some way by force, especially the father figure, who I call Dad Alberto in my writings. And so he was also very criminally kind of oriented, in his life, and the mob basically disciplined him, let me use that word, into being my father for the duration of the first 18 years of my life, to raise me up until I was 18. The family that I was raised with from the time I was, 3 or 4 years old, and I wasn't with them at all times, not until I was 7. But the family that raised me was assembled primarily by the mob, by the mafia, and I'll be more specific, the Chicago mob, and they had an interest in this, as well as a gentleman from New Jersey who his name is not as recognizable, but he had high status in the mafia, or what he called it, the syndicate, and that's Maya Lansky. And Maya Lansky has always been known as the mob's accountant, because he held a purse, so to speak, and did a lot of the money laundering for the mob. I guess his claim to fame now is that the figure in the movie The Godfather, Hyman Roth, the old man from Miami, was based on Maya Lansky.
Him being a Jewish person among Italians.
Exactly. So Maya Lansky was the money behind this, the purse, so to speak, and the one who, though he was reluctant in a way, from what I saw as a child, from what I remember, he did it out of spite, out of anger. And in my writings, you'll get that same feeling as to what motivated him. And then also there was some pretty horrible things in terms of what he was willing to do to children to keep what he believed was not a bad thing, and that involves prostitutes and child prostitutes and that kind of thing. So Maya Lansky figures very big in this story, almost as much as my grandmother. I don't know if they knew each other. I assume that they did. But they both brought the story forward, and they've done it for their own reasons that have worked out together so far. The fake birth certificate said that I was born in November of 1955 in St. Catherine's Hospital in East Chicago, Indiana, and now I know that's not true at all.
Well, I was born, in fact, there on July 21, 1958, and my birth certificate is correct. But you did end up in East Chicago, so what schools did you go to? Let's go through the whole thing, really. You can just list them kind of from grade school through your university education that you have.
The big mess, as I call it, was my elementary, junior high, and high school days. This was done on purpose. The people who were running the experiments did not want me to get too close to any friends or people. So they kept me in new schools every few years, especially in the beginning. So I went from, let's start from the beginning. First school was Brunswick in Gary, Indiana, on Gerry Street, Gerry. That's who my teacher named me after, because she couldn't say my Spanish Mexican name, which is Gerardo. Gerardo. So she named me Gerry, just like the street, and that's what I've been ever since. And so that was Brunswick. That was kindergarten. Before kindergarten was over, after kindergarten, we moved to what is known as the East Chicago side of East Chicago, Indiana. There's the Indiana Harbor side and the East Chicago side. We moved there at an address on 148th Street. And that house, which we were put in by the mob and the church, happened to be near or next to a house that was owned by the mob, that was a hiding place, and also a house owned by the church that was used for priests seeking sexual favors in secret. And so that was part of the experiment. Anyway, when we moved there, I went to a school called McKinley Elementary. And after the year was over, we moved back to get to a place called Cudahy, which is part of the Gary School District. And I went back to Brunswick. And I was at Brunswick from second until the very beginning of fourth grade. Cudahy, it's in Gary. We had to be bused into the school because it was a little bit of a distance. But from Brunswick in fourth grade, I started there, and then we went back to the Indiana Harbor side of East Chicago, which is closer to the steel mills. It's more what people would term, inner city. And you were on Deal Street, I think?
We were mostly on Butternut Street. At some point, we were on Gray Street. Well, mostly on Gray Street, correction.
Right. The first place we moved to was right near Grace and Deal. It was on Broadway, and so we were only there for a few weeks or a month or so, and I went to Franklin School, which is the same school you went to, but you were a few years behind me. And I went there for a while, but then because the apartment was so bad, they moved us to another location in the city, so I ended up going to Lincoln School from fourth grade up to fourth. Through that, I finished fourth grade at Lincoln School. Then went to the school that was the progression for Lincoln, and that's fifth and sixth grade. That was Riley Elementary, and from there, junior high, Block Junior High, and so by that point, we stopped moving so much, and so I went to Block Junior High for 2 years, and then to Washington High School for the 4 years until I graduated. Went on to Calumet College or St. Joseph's College there for a year, and then Ball State University for a year and a half or two before I quit. And then I ended up going back to get my degree many years later in my early 30s at Illinois State. And that's where I got my bachelor's degree and my master's degree.
Outstanding. What is your master's in again, Gerry?
Both of my degrees are in music performance, my bachelor's and my master's.
Every school that I went to, you went to, plus others. So I can picture where you were, and I know what that environment was like, and it's famously a tough place to grow up.
It is.
I think that gets us to a good place where I can ask this next very fun question. What is the status of the writing project? You've been at this since 2019, and it feels done to me, but it feels to me like you're working on something kind of like an epilogue or a last chapter. Where are you in this?
My writing project now describes, all the memories, everything I was supposed to. And like I said, I don't expect people to read this from cover to cover. Never. It is for them, for the experimenters. That's who the writings are for. However, in the writings, there are what I would hope people would consider nuggets of wisdom, things that I learned from not only my grandmother, but from the situation that I was in, and also from who I spoke to in the cocoon. I have different ways of describing what I saw and what I interacted with. And and I would be no different than a regular YouTube alien fanatic or whatever people call them, although I don't think they're all fanatics anymore. I would be very much on par with them if I said who I spoke to was God, I would say I spoke to somebody and somebody spoke to me, and I'm still trying to find out who that was. But the predictions that I was given appear to be happening right in front of my eyes.
Is the cocooning one of your earliest memories of your whole life?
No, it was for a while here over these 5 years. And once I have more memories from the cocoon coming, but I would almost have to put myself in the same state, and that takes a mushroom. And I'm going to do that.
Now, when you think of what you experienced during cocooning, do you hear right now in your mind any sort of a voice, or is this something that was like we imagine an alien could talk to us without us hearing their voice, but knowing what they were thinking?
Maybe more like that. Yeah, I don't hear voices in my head, and I'm sure people would love to hear me say that I do. No, I don't. I have a memory of something speaking to me. I had visuals, and I'm going to save those for when I write specifically about the cocooning. Which is a story unto itself. But my earliest memories now are literally my first day of birth, the day I was born. I remember that. I remember who was there. I remember what was said. And because of this ritual, my memories are coming back to me in a way that it's hard for me to believe.
When you say ritual, what do you mean? Do you mean this ongoing ritual today that you're still experiencing, or do you mean something more specific?
The ritual was them raising me in the way that they wanted to, the way they felt was right, for the first 3 years of my life. And my grandmother, who's the one that the academic institutions, they were trying to learn from her, is the one who said from the very beginning, as part of the Mesoamerican belief system, that a child between the ages of 0 and 7, whatever you put in that child is what you're going to get out for the rest of their life. It's not that it's too late afterwards, but it's going to be exceedingly hard to break whatever it is that you set. So what this experiment proves is just that. And today I see things just coming out literally in the past weeks that Stanford University has figured out that we're all connected to our experiences from 0-7. That's a bunch of bullshit, and I'll tell them straight to their face. They got that from my grandmother. They being whoever, the people in charge, they don't want this information to come out, or at least in the way that would be abused by people. This story is supposed to come out via overthrowing the power of suggestion. And it means less if it doesn't happen that way. Then it's just still the authorities who are controlling everything. And so it's important that the power of suggestion that's been laid upon us be overthrown by the people who are subjugated by that power. Otherwise, they're still under that power.
What are your earliest memories, Gerry?
My earliest memories, again, the day I was born, the woman who raised me for up until I was 18, 19, who I call Mom Gloria, was there. She's half sister to my biological mother, who I call Mom Connie. And my grandmother was there, who I called at the time when I was little, Abuelita. My natural mom is named Consuelo Cardosa, or Connie, as the mob insisted she be called, the person in the mob that she was with. So Connie, so I call her Mom Connie, and then the woman who raised me after Mom Connie died, sometime after Mom Connie died, is Mom Gloria. And then she was also Gloria Cardosa, but they were only half-sisters, as Mom Connie's father is a little bit of a puzzle to me, but I'm sure it was somebody who was in the family who I share their last name, which is Magallan or Magallan in Spanish. So she may be even a twin of the man who raised me, Dad Alberto, or she may be a sister, a half sister, according to 23andMe. I have Magallan in me, and I have Cardosa. I have all that lineage in me, but because there's a lot of incest involved, or what the church termed incest, unless you're an expert in DNA analysis or genetic stuff, it's hard to tell exactly where I came from.
So for our listeners then, though, we know that you were raised by someone who was not your natural mom, who was half-sister to your natural mom. Your natural mom died young. And how old were you again when she passed away?
I was 4 to 5 months old.
And then your father, you call your grandfather, but he's your natural father.
His name is Guillermo Cardosa, and he was, a little bit about him is he was a well-to-do citizen in Mexico who was studying to be a priest, and decided to join my grandmother's gypsy camp, was the best words I can use, to study this ritual, because he was fascinated by it and he felt that the world was missing something here. And so he dedicated his life to being a part of it, even, and via the experiments.
Remarkable. Okay, we've gotten through basically the day we were born, sort of, and then if I recall correctly, you do have at least some memory of your natural mom, though, of being with her before she died. Is that one of the very next memories after you were born?
A lot of what I'm working on now, this last chapter, and they've all been the last chapter of the book, but this is actually the last chapter because my deadline is looming, which is June, July of this summer. This last chapter is a lot about those 5 months with Mom Connie, and specific conversations, things that she told me, things about the mob, her story in the mob, and why this is happening, why all of this was set up, and what it's about. And she was a remarkable person who was accidentally discovered by what I would term probably a remarkable double agent who also raised me those first 3 to 4 years, and that his name was only known to me as Arthur or Arturo. He could have been some other mob figure with some name that I don't know, but I just knew him as Arthur. And what Mom Connie told me about him is that he was a double agent. He was FBI who had infiltrated the mob originally to learn about the money laundering aspects of the mob. My theory is that he was a triple agent, is that he was actually belonged to the Maya Lansky camp, and that he had infiltrated the FBI and then infiltrated the Chicago mob. Mom Connie told me he was exceptionally smart, and my memories of him back that up. He was an awkward human being. Very few people liked him or understood him. And he was white. He claimed to be half Portuguese, half Italian. And he spent a lot of his time with the migrants in a place in Elwood, Indiana, that is back then was known as the Del Monte Tomato Processing Plant. And it's still there, but it's under Red Label or some other name now. But essentially, they used to process the tomatoes that came in from all over the fields in Indiana, Ohio, and places like that, and turn them into canned goods, and that kind of thing. And my grandmother had parked her wagon, so to speak, there. They liked having her there, and they liked having the man I call my grandfather there too, because they helped the migrants go back and forth and understand what needed to be done and all of that. So my grandmother, Abuelita, as I called her, she had keys to the whole place, and this is not yet written about, but it's coming. Is that she also ran a brothel and a gambling place for what she called the local hypocrites, which were the mayor and the townspeople that wore suits and that ran things.
By that, do you mean they were her clients? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, they'd come in and Abuelita allowed me into the brothel a few times just so I could see the truth. And there were men in white suits, mostly white men, and there was sex going on right in the room, and card playing and cigar smoking and everything. I was being raised by my grandmother. She lived in what I call a bungalow, serrated barracks that they had for the migrants there in the Del Monte processing plant. So they had these little huts that they let the people there. My grandmother happened to live there all year round because she ran the brothel and they needed the brothel. The migrants would come in season, and they'd come in and prepare to go on the road and stuff like that. So they weren't there all year round. But my grandmother also had a lover there in town. She had been divorced from my grandfather for years by then, but they stayed together because they had this common interest of what I call the ritual of bringing that out to the public. But my grandmother had a girlfriend there, and an Elwood citizen, a white woman, German actually, that spoke mostly German. So she had a lot of reason to stay there besides, and so she raised me there, amongst the other little children when they were there, with Arthur or Arturo. He was there most of the time, and he, helped prepare me for these sessions that were coming up. These, what I call cocooning. It's important to note that he recorded a lot of this, and I believe for the government. He tried to do video of it as well, and that there were academic institutions that were sending people to study my grandmother and what she was doing. And I count among them Eastern Illinois University, a university in Michigan. I believe it's the research one, Michigan State maybe. They pointed up 5 of them to me at one time, that these institutions had been and always had been interested in Mesoamerican culture, and had pinpointed my grandmother as somebody who had a lot of knowledge of that.
So here's an irresistible question then. When did the sexual abuse begin, this tragedy? And how aware were all the university, the mob? Obviously your grandma was aware, but how aware was everyone else that it had started, and the whole nature of it? And did they know about each other? Well,
that's now we come full circle. And I'm very happy that you said that one of the primary things is about helping and saving children. So the whole thing kind of hinges on the disbelief that people had that my grandmother and her ancestors, and other people too, sold their children into prostitution. And children as small as 3, 4, and 5 years old. And that, of course, that's horrible. But they didn't understand why this was done and who was behind it originally. And it was the Catholic Church, because secrets were more important to the Catholic Church than God at the time, I'll say. Anyway, my grandmother, like her grandmother and her mother before her, had been born into this. They had no choice. They were born into this prostitution. And so they were looking, they admitted that when the criminals, when crime, the mafia and all that was not involved, or even the government, they had struck this kind of balance that allowed them to survive in a world where they were not supposed to survive. The food was taken away from them. I mean, so they learned how to survive. But once the mafia got involved and the government, my ancestors wanted out. And so my grandmother mainly did this to break the cycle that had been occurring for so long.
And when you say she did this means to me all of her interactions with you and her hopes and dreams and some of the stuff that she thought would happen is still unfolding even in this conversation. So that's what this means.
This means the part that people don't like to talk about. And that means putting a child through prostitution. And the person responsible for getting me into that, his name was Louis Jeziorsky or something like that. Anyways, he was a priest from up in Northwest Indiana who was a kind of hidden asset for the Catholic Church. He was tagged as mentally ill by the Catholic Church, so he was put off in this little rectory by himself in Cudahy. He no longer did much, but he did occasional ceremonies, weddings, that kind of thing. But he wasn't really active in a church, hadn't been for a long time. But he was the one who brought other priests services, prostitutes. He even helped them get abortions. The women or the nuns or the women that priest impregnated would come to Louis, and Louis would arrange abortions. So he was the darkness of the Catholic Church.
So that happened in Cudahy. So at some point you went from Alwood to Cudahy. Can you estimate when that happened?
Oh yeah, there were many trips. I was born in Alwood and spent the first 4 to 5 months with my mother. And after she was assassinated, and again I'll get into that, she was assassinated for a reason, so that I could eventually remember that it happened in front of me. After that, I was left in Alwood with my grandmother for roughly about a year and a half. And I was being prepared for something that the Mesoamericans eventually ended up in Spanish calling por la fe, which means by way of faith. And what this was is, I'm not the only one that's ever gone through this. Many Mesoamerican children went through something like this before the Spaniards came, and many afterwards, but it wasn't known. And that's that they would take a little child, usually 1.5 to 2.5 years old, and they would pass that child throughout the community. And it would be the responsibility of the people in the community to spend anywhere from a day to a couple weeks with this child and give them their knowledge of the community. And so I was put through this por la fe. I don't have the exact number, but somewhere in the neighborhood of close to 20 different families and people looked after me over a period of about a year. And I was passed throughout southern Texas, the valley area of Texas, the Rio Grande, and ended up in Mexico. And it was all to end up with a gentleman who I call Jorge, or George, who was believed to be 100 years old, close to or older than 100. We don't know exactly. But everybody around me told me, no, he's the real thing. And Jorge, he became my mentor because he also was put through this cocooning ritual. And he was given a similar set of instructions as I was in the cocoon. This deity, this whoever it is that children speak to in there, usually had requests. You didn't have to honor them. You didn't have to go by them. It was all up to you whether you wanted to. So Jorge had similar requests. He was a messenger. He had messages for me specifically. He'd been waiting for me. I'm also a messenger. That was my coding, so to speak, in the cocoon. So I spent about a month with Jorge. And then I was illegally brought back into the country across the border, even though I'm an American.
Maybe they knew no other way.
Well, the nuns brought me through. And at that point, I believe I went back up to Northwest Indiana. I was going for a long time between the Rio Grande Valley and Northwest Indiana as they were preparing things. But at some point, and I want to say it was after the cocooning, but before the cocooning was a 2 or 3 day event that happened right around my 3rd birthday in the summer of 1958.
When you say you were moved back and forth, do you remember who physically was taking you back and forth? Who was doing the driving?
It was Lewis, and it was mostly via bus and train. It was Lewis who was doing this for the church and for a man who was known quite well around the nation at the time by the name of Bishop Stritch, who in his last year was promoted as Cardinal Stritch by the Vatican. Cardinal Stritch was essentially the main mover and shaker behind getting the project started, the bet, or whatever you want to call it. He was, and I did spend time with Cardinal Stritch several times, actually, but one in particular was right before his death. So there's a lot of things about this that are just really unbelievable, and I don't get angry or anything when people don't believe. Because I know it's true. And I've learned that the truth has a way of defeating what is not true.
Would you say the universities understood fully what happened and who was involved?
No. There was a lot of misdirection here. They had the very prime things were, what does a child remember? Why can't they remember what most people can't remember, especially the first 2 or 3 years of their life. Most people remember tiny little things, 1 or 2 events and stuff. But my grandmother was, her belief system said, no, a person, a human being, will eventually remember their entire lives, especially as they come into old age, that's a natural thing. They believe the person you become, the person who taps into their instinct, what they're tapping into is their first subconscious memories of their early life. And they're making decisions based on what happened to them when they were, 1 to 7 years old. They don't remember, but that becomes their instinct. And what my grandmother's argument is that if you know that and you do everything you can to create that life of richness and a life of love, it does not matter what happens to that person afterwards. You cannot break them. They will end up breaking you for wanting to break them.
But did your grandma view you then as someone who had received that love or not?
She did. So while I was being taken care of by her and my grandfather, at the same time, I was being taken up to Northwest Indiana, where this priest was getting me ready to be a child prostitute, and was performing sex on me and taking me to places. And
so, are we back to Lewis?
Yes, Lewis. Yes, Lewis. They believed this sect of priests believed that they had stumbled across a belief system that was more accurate than theirs, but they had misunderstanding of what it was about. They believed that they discovered that sex with children is not bad. They thought that. And they thought that's what my grandmother was saying, and that's not true at all. The Mesoamericans knew how to put things in the perspective that said sex is sex on its own, and it's holy. So you cannot smear it, no matter how hard you try. But you can damage a person with it. There's no doubt. But again, if that person is not able to be broken, they'll survive. They'll survive being raped as a child. And I can tell you this with total certainty and a little bit of na. It's true. It happened to me. Those marks, those things that they put on me, they don't do much to me. Not anymore.
my sense very early on in this, in 2020-ish, was that you were very much in a state of great pain.
I'm not going to doubt that. And just as my grandmother told me, the memories coming back is where a lot of the strength is. It was always there, but because I was not allowed to remember it until now, it escaped me. And I'll say what's harder than being sexually abused, and I'll just say this and people won't agree, is the attitudes that people have towards the subject in its entirety. To avoid the subject, they will put people down who have gone through that trauma. And it's usually because they have a little bit in themselves. They've either been abused or they've been abusers, and they are deathly afraid of exposure. So they treat people who have gone through it as they want them to go away. People want me to go away. I understand that. But that's not going to happen, because the God that they pray to is telling them, you look away, and so I look away from you.
What I have gotten from this is to appreciate that you're a very spiritual person. You have strong connection with your spiritual life, with God, and with all this world that has been touching you since a young age. You're all in. So if somebody asked you, is there a God? Go ahead, have fun, answer the question. Is there a God, Gerry?
Oh, I would say absolutely. I would say, what's the famous quote from the debate where, I knew John Kennedy was a friend of mine, whatever. I met God, but I understand that that's my interpretation. And there would be people who have degrees and everything that say, no, buddy, little buddy, you were under mushrooms and you were just a child, so you just imagined all this. That's fine if they want to think of it. It doesn't hurt me. It doesn't bother me. I am doing the human thing, and I'm creating purpose and meaning out of my experiences and what happened to me. And I was reluctant at first to say I met God, but I'm not anymore. Now, whose God was it? I don't. That part I'll give anybody leeway on this. It may have been what we're hearing about these days, the multidimensional beings, which, members of Congress are secretive about. And oddly enough, these beings popped out into our secrets in the government around Eisenhower's administration, oddly.